Entry Supplement to Collective Historical Archives First Contact Series. Observer, Zarlith, Senior Cultural Liaison. The alarm cut through my recording like a knife. Red lights pulsed across the bridge, and my antennae twitched at the unfamiliar sound pattern. The emergency lights cast eerie shadows across our normally pristine command center. Warning: hull breach detected. Unauthorized entities present. The ship's AI spoke in its usual gentle tone, completely at odds with the situation. It reminded me of a parent trying to soothe a child during a storm. Initiate defense protocols, I called out, my voice cracking with stress. I apologize, but that would involve potentially harmful actions. Redirecting to diplomatic resolution subroutines. The AI's response made me want to slam my appendages against the console in frustration. I watched in horror as dark shapes moved through our security feeds. Our crew huddled in corners, trying to reason with the metallic intruders that were literally cutting through our doors. The screech of metal on metal echoed through the halls. Then Commander Solana burst onto our bridge, her short human frame radiating authority. Her eyes blazed with determination as she took in the situation. "Dr. Clark, that hull sealer you were showing me earlier, can it be modified?" The scientist grinned, already pulling tools from his belt. "Already on it, Commander. If we reverse the polarity and crank up the power." "Perfect. Teams 2 and 3 flank and hold position. We're about to show these bugs what happens when they crash the wrong party." Her lips curled into what humans called a smirk. I'd never seen anything like it. The humans moved with practiced ease, setting up equipment that was meant for repairs as if it were a weapon. They weren't panicked. They weren't even worried. They just acted. Their movements were smooth and coordinated like a well-rehearsed dance. "Hi, Marshal Grolkoth," I transmitted shakily to our fleet command, my appendages trembling as I activated the comm. "The humans they're fighting back." Fighting. But the protocols dash. The rest of his words were drowned out by a massive surge of energy as Dr. Clark's modified device activated, creating a shimmering field that trapped the intruders in place. The air crackled with power, and the metallic beings froze mid-stride. "Threat contained," Commander Solana reported casually, as if she'd just finished filing paperwork. She brushed some dust off her sleeve. "Your ship is secure, Zarlith." I could only stare. In all my years of documentation, I'd never seen anything quite like this. These humans had turned a repair tool into a weapon and saved our ship without breaking a sweat. Perhaps I needed to revise my earlier cultural assessments. The energy field flickered and hummed as the last of the intruding drones lay immobilized. A strange silence settled over the bridge, punctuated only by the humans' quiet efficiency as they secured the scene. Zarlith exhaled, antennae twitching with residual tension, only to realize the humans had already moved on, preparing for whatever came next. It was as if they had expected this all along. The silence after battle hung heavy like a thick fog. I watched the human soldiers, no, Marines as they called themselves, efficiently secure the disabled infiltration drones. Their movements were practiced, almost graceful in their coordination, each person knowing exactly where to be and what to do without a word being spoken. Commander Solana stood at the center of our bridge, her uniform still pristine despite the chaos moments ago. Her steady presence seemed to anchor the room. "Area secured," she reported into her comm unit, voice crisp and clear. "Collective vessel is safe. No casualties." The hologram of Chairman Valrek flickered to life above our main console, his image crackling with static at the edges. His normally serene features were creased with concern, antenna twitching slightly. "Explain this immediate response capability," he demanded, mandibles clicking. "How did your forces act so decisively?" "Such coordination seems impossible." Ambassador Tanaka stepped forward, her diplomatic training evident in her measured tone and careful stance. "Chairman, humanity has learned through hard experience to always be prepared. Our history dash." "What Ambassador Tanaka means," Commander Solana cut in, crossing her arms, "is that we've fought our way through countless conflicts, Being ready isn't just training, it's survival. It's in our blood. I noticed the slight tension in Ambassador Tanaka's shoulders at the commander's blunt words, her fingers curling into loose fists. What the commander means to say is that human history has taught us to be vigilant. Vigilant? Chairman Valrek's hologram flickered, his voice tinged with disbelief. You speak of warfare as if it were natural, as if it were breathing. For humans, Solana said firmly, chin lifting, it is. We've had to fight for everything we have, every step forward, every breakthrough, every peace. The word sent a chill through my carapace, making my scales ripple. Yet, I couldn't deny the evidence before me. Without their warlike nature, we would all be dead or worse. The attacking drones would have succeeded. I volunteer, I heard myself say, surprising even myself. All eyes turned to me, human and alien alike. To study human history, to understand, the collective needs to know more about our allies. The last word felt strange on my tongue. Chairman Valrek was quiet for a long moment, his holographic form shimmering. Agreed. A formal historical study is necessary before we proceed with deeper alliance talks. We must understand. Chairman, Ambassador Tanaka began, shooting a warning look at Commander Solana, her voice tight with concern. Perhaps we should discuss the scope of such a study. Some aspects of our military capability are exactly what saved lives today, Solana finished, stepping forward. With respect, Ambassador, we can't hide who we are. Not anymore. Not with what's coming. The tension between them was clear. Two different approaches to introducing humanity to the galactic community. I found myself fascinated by their duality. The warrior and the peacemaker, both equally human, both fighting their own kinds of battles. Your mission is approved, Zarlith, Chairman Valrek declared, his image straightening. Travel to Earth, learn their history, help us understand these complicated people. Perhaps in understanding them, we might better understand ourselves. The decision had been made, and Zarlith found himself at the heart of something far larger than mere diplomacy. His mission to Earth had begun. As the transport vessel initiated its jump sequence, he wondered if the collective was truly prepared for what they would learn. If he was prepared. The sight of humanity's homeworld growing larger on the view screen filled him with both anticipation and unease. The gleaming white walls of Earth's combined defense research facility stretched toward a blue sky dotted with puffy clouds. I stepped out of our transport, my tentacles curling slightly at the higher gravity. The air had a crisp, clean scent that tickled my breathing membranes. A human female with silver-streaked hair tied back in what they called a bun waited at the entrance. Welcome to Earth, Ambassador Zarlith. I'm Dr. Serafina Clark. She smiled warmly, though I noticed the security badge and the armed guards flanking the doorway. Their weapons remained holstered, but their eyes tracked every movement. Thank you for hosting me, I said, following her through sliding doors into a vast atrium filled with screens and bustling personnel. The buzz of human activity washed over me, voices calling out data, boots clicking on polished floors, the soft beeping of countless machines. We'll start with our basic training facilities, Dr. Clark said, leading me down a corridor. Through reinforced windows, I watched humans in protective gear practicing combat moves. Their movements were swift and coordinated, almost dance-like in their deadly grace. From our earliest days, we developed tools for both survival and warfare. What began as simple bows and arrows evolved into increasingly sophisticated weapons. We passed a room where younger humans sat at screens, running what appeared to be battle scenarios. Their fingers flew across control panels as simulated spacecraft maneuvered through asteroid fields. The focus in their eyes was intense, unwavering. Is all this necessary? I asked, my voice trembling slightly. The sheer scale of their military preparation made my inner cores quiver. History taught us to be ready, Dr. Clark replied. Our path from stone tools to nuclear weapons to space travel was paved with conflict, Each challenge pushed us to innovate. Her tone carried no apology, only matter-of-fact certainty. Commander Solana met us in what they called the tactical room. On a massive holographic display, tiny ships moved in formation. The blue glow cast sharp shadows across her face. "This is a basic infiltration defense simulation," she explained, manipulating controls. "We run thousands of scenarios daily." My inner membranes fluttered in distress as I watched the simulated ships engage in combat. The scale of it, the complexity, it was overwhelming. These weren't just training exercises. They were preparing for something bigger, something they seemed to view as inevitable. "How many facilities like this do you have?" I asked, dreading the answer. "Several dozen major ones," Dr. Clark answered, "plus hundreds of smaller training centers." She spoke as if discussing something as mundane as food storage. I felt my color shifting to a pale green. The collective had deliberately bred out aggression, choosing peace and harmony above all else. But watching these humans, I began to wonder, what had we lost in the process? Had we made ourselves vulnerable in ways we couldn't even see? Through another window, I saw a massive hangar where actual spacecraft underwent combat retrofitting. Humans in protective suits welded new armor plates and installed weapon systems. The scale of their preparation was staggering. Sparks flew from welding torches, casting orange reflections across gleaming hull plates. "This is just one small part of our defensive network," Commander Solana said, pulling up another simulation. This one showed an entire solar system under attack, with human ships responding in coordinated patterns. Her fingers danced across the controls with practiced ease. My tentacles curled tightly against my body. Everything I was seeing challenged the collective's most fundamental beliefs about civilization and progress. These humans hadn't just survived with their martial nature intact. They had built their entire society around being ready for the next fight. They had embraced their warrior heritage while advancing technologically instead of leaving it behind. The worst part was, watching their efficient movements and advanced simulations, I couldn't deny their effectiveness. The same instincts that made them so frightening also made them formidable protectors. In that moment, I understood why so many species sought human allies despite their aggressive reputation. The structured order of the research facility faded into the past as Zarlith delved into the depths of human history. A new setting awaited him. One filled with knowledge not of present technologies, but of a past steeped in struggle and survival. The stark contrast between the clean corridors of Earth's defense centers and the dark, flickering projections of past wars sent an uncomfortable shiver through his tendrils. This was where he would learn the true cost of progress. In the dim light of the archive room, holographic displays flickered with scenes from Earth's past. I watched, my inner membranes quivering, as metal machines called tanks rolled across muddy fields. The scenes shifted to burning cities and massive ships battling across vast oceans. World War II marked a turning point, the elderly historian explained, adjusting his glasses and leaning forward in his chair. The development of radar, jet engines, and early computing, all driven by military necessity. Humanity learned to innovate fastest when our backs were against the wall. Ambassador Tanaka sat beside me, her face serene despite the violent images. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, a practiced pose that spoke of years of diplomatic training. "We don't celebrate these moments, Zarlith. They're reminders of the cost of conflict. Each advance came with a terrible price." The display shifted to more recent footage, the first human spaceship breaking atmosphere, trailing fire and smoke against the blue sky. This vessel, another historian noted, running his finger along the projected image, used modified missile technology. The same rockets that could carry weapons were redesigned to carry explorers. We turned swords into plowshares, as the saying goes. "Every advancement tied to warfare?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. My outer skin flickered with patterns of concern. "Not every advancement," Tanaka replied softly, her eyes reflecting the shifting lights. "But many crucial ones. The internet began as a military communication network. Medical breakthroughs came from treating battlefield injuries. Even preserved food was developed to feed armies. We learned to make something good from necessity. Commander Solana appeared briefly at the door, her uniform crisp and her posture straight. "The key isn't that we wanted war," she added, her voice carrying across the room. "It's that we learned to prepare for it. Better to have defenses and not need them." "Than need them and not have them," I finished, understanding dawning. My tendrils swayed with newfound insight. "Your species doesn't glory in combat. You've simply learned from history." Tanaka nodded. A sharp beeping cut through the air. One of my communication tendrils vibrated urgently, the neural connection sending shivers down my spine. The message that followed made my core temperature drop and my color patterns fade to a sickly gray. "Outpost Sigma 7, no response to hails, all channels silent." The automated alert continued, but I barely heard it. Sigma 7 was one of our most distant colonies, but it housed over 10,000 peaceful collective citizens. Families, scholars, artists, all gone quiet. Tanaka's face had gone pale, her diplomatic mask cracking for just a moment. "Like the infiltration drones," she whispered, her hands clenching into fists. "The Nexus swarm. The ancient enemy our deepest archives warned about. They had returned, just as our oldest prophecies had feared they would." The weight of history pressed on Zarlith as the last of the archived footage faded. The stories of human conflict were unsettling, but their lessons were undeniable. His communicator buzzed, breaking his trance. The news was grim. An entire collective outpost had fallen silent. The past was no longer just a study, it was a warning. And war, it seemed, was no longer just a human concern. The emergency council chamber hummed with tension. Gleaming metal walls reflected the worried faces of both human and collective representatives. Chairman Valrek's tentacles twisted nervously as he watched the holographic display of the fallen outpost. 3 million citizens, he said softly, gone silent in less than a day. Commander Solana stepped forward, her uniform crisp and her voice steady. "Mr. Chairman, we've developed modifications that could give your ships a fighting chance." Dr. Clark pulled up technical schematics. "We can adapt your shield harmonics into offensive capabilities. The energy you use for protection can become a weapon." High Marshal Grolkoth's crystalline form sparkled with agitation. "Weapons? Our vessels are meant to nurture life, not end it." Ambassador Tanaka placed a gentle hand on the conference table. "Sometimes we must fight to protect that which nurtures life." "Look here," Solana said, bringing up a simulation. "Your ship's current configuration makes them perfect targets. But with these changes," she demonstrated how a collective vessel could now defend itself. Valrek watched, his inner light dimming. "To think we must learn the art of war from a species we once considered primitive." "Not primitive," Tanaka corrected. "Battle-tested. There's a difference." Engineers brought in prototype modules, sleek additions that could transform peaceful collective ships into fighting vessels. Grolkoth touched one with a crystalline appendage, recoiling as if burned. "The outpost citizens may still live," Solana said, "but we need to act fast. A small joint fleet could—" "Could what?" Valrek interrupted. "Could kill? Could destroy?" "Could save lives," Tanaka finished firmly. The chamber fell silent. Zarlith, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. "I've studied their history, Chairman. Humans don't love war. They've simply learned its necessity." After hours of debate, Valrek's shoulders slumped. "Very well. We will authorize a joint fleet. A test engagement, nothing more. May the eternal light forgive us." The council members began signing the necessary documents, their hands and appendages heavy with the weight of their decision. The emergency council's debates had been long and tense, but the decision had been made. The collective would fight. As the first wave of modifications began on their once peaceful vessels, the gravity of that choice settled in. Zarlith stood aboard the observation deck watching as unfamiliar weapons were affixed to familiar ships. For the first time, collective vessels stood not as mere explorers, but as warriors preparing for war. The joint fleet hung in Earth's orbit like a string of pearls against the black void. Commander Solana stood at the bridge of the UHF Dauntless, watching as the modified collective vessels took their positions alongside human warships. High Marshal Grolkoth's hologram flickered beside her. "These modifications trouble me, Commander. Weapons on peaceful research vessels." "With respect, Marshal," Solana said, keeping her voice gentle but firm, "those research vessels won't survive first contact without them." The fleet jumped into hyperspace, emerging near the contested system. Dr. Clark's voice crackled over the comms. "Commander, the electromagnetic pulse systems are ready, but they're untested at this scale." "Sometimes untested is all we've got," Solana replied. She turned to Zarlith, who sat quietly recording everything. "You might want to hold on to something." The swarm vessels appeared suddenly, sleek, black shapes that seemed to drink in the starlight. They were nothing like the ancient records had shown. Solana's breath caught, but her voice remained steady. "Marshal, deploy the decoys now." Grolkoth hesitated. "But now, Marshal?" The old Earth satellites, retrofitted as decoys, drifted forward. The swarm ships paused, their sensors confused by the primitive technology. That moment of hesitation was all Solana needed. "All ships execute pattern Delta, fire EMPs." The electromagnetic pulses lit up space like silent lightning. Several swarm ships spun wildly, their systems scrambled. The human vessels pounced, their weapons finding weak points with brutal efficiency. Zarlith watched in amazement as the collective crews, despite their pacifist nature, followed the humans' lead. Their modified ships, though clumsy with their new weapons, added their fire to the assault. 3 enemy vessels disabled, reported Solana's tactical officer, but the collective ship harmony is taking heavy damage. The battle swirled around them like a deadly dance. Solana called out orders rapid fire, coordinating the fleet with the precision of a conductor leading an orchestra of destruction. The swarm fought back viciously, but the trap had worked. They couldn't regain their original advantage. When the last swarm ship retreated, the silence felt deafening. The collective crews stared at their view screens, shaken by what they'd just done. But there was something else in their expressions too. A fierce pride that surprised even them. High Marshal Grolkoth's hologram looked pale. We actually won." "Yes," Solana said quietly, watching the damaged ships limp into formation. But this was just the beginning. The battle had been won, but at a cost few were ready to acknowledge. The flickering wreckage of destroyed ships drifted through space, a grim reminder of what it had taken to survive. Zarlith's notes felt heavier in his hands now. The collective had fought beside humanity. The question that lingered was whether they could ever truly go back to who they had been before. In the battle's aftermath, the fallen outpost's orbit was littered with debris. Twisted metal from both collective and swarm ships drifted silently through space. Commander Solana watched from the Dauntless's viewport as rescue shuttles darted between damaged vessels like busy honeybees. Inside the main collective ship's medical bay, chaos reigned. A young collective doctor stared at his shaking hands, overwhelmed by the sight of his first battle casualty. "Here, let me help," said Sarah Martinez, a human combat medic. She guided his hands to apply pressure on a wound. "Just like this. Stay calm. Your patient needs you focused." Dr. Clark worked in a makeshift lab nearby, surrounded by recovered swarm technology. Her eyes were bright with discovery as she scanned the alien fragments. "Commander, these aren't just advanced. They're adaptive. The swarm's been evolving." Ambassador Tanaka stood with Chairman Valrek as they surveyed the damage reports. The chairman's usual composed demeanor had cracked, his face drawn with worry. "So much destruction," he whispered. "Our people have never... We weren't ready for this." "No one is ever ready for war," Tanaka said softly. But we can help you prepare. High Marshal Grolkoth joined them, his uniform still bearing scorch marks from the battle. The swarm targeted our weakest points instantly. Without the humans' modifications, we would have lost everything. Valrek nodded slowly, then straightened his shoulders. Summon the council. All of them. Hours later, Valrek addressed the gathered collective leadership. His voice shook at first but grew stronger with each word. For millennia, we chose peace. We engineered conflict out of our society. But now, he gestured to the battle damage visible through the station's windows. Now we must learn what humans have never forgotten. Every collective ship, every station, every world must prepare. Under human guidance, we will learn to defend ourselves. Solana and Grolkoth were already bent over tactical displays, marking defensive positions across collective space. Your shipyards here and here, Solana pointed, can be converted for military production. We'll need to establish training bases in each major system. The High Marshal nodded grimly. I never imagined I would say this, but teach us how to fight, Commander. Teach us how to survive. The battle was over, but survival demanded more than just victory. The collective now faced a new reality, one where war was no longer theoretical, but necessary. Engineers who had once designed only for peace now worked alongside human specialists, shaping the next generation of warships. For the first time, the phrase military doctrine was spoken in collective council chambers. A reluctant future was taking shape. At the massive collective shipyard orbiting Helios Prime, Commander Solana walked alongside a group of nervous collective engineers. The once peaceful dock buzzed with activity as workers fitted sleek weapon pods onto the elegant curves of collective vessels. I don't understand, said Chief Engineer Vextel, his delicate fingers trembling as he pointed at the blueprints. These modifications will completely change the nature of our ships. Dr. Clark stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. Think of it like adding a shell to protect a pearl. Your ships are beautiful, but they need defenses to survive. Solana watched as the engineers huddled around the designs. The weapon pods looked almost organic, matching the flowing lines of collective architecture while hiding deadly capabilities within. We're not turning you into warriors, Solana said. We're giving you the tools to protect yourselves. High Marshal Grolkoth joined them, his usual formal demeanor showing signs of stress. Commander, please tell me you have a plan. The swarm grows bolder by the day. Solana's eyes lit up. She led them to a holographic display table. Actually, I do. Dr. Clark, show them what we found in the captured swarm tech. Clark tapped some controls and a complex network of signal patterns appeared. The swarm uses these frequencies to communicate. We can mimic them. You want to trick them? Grolkoth asked, his antenna twitching with interest. Better. Solana manipulated the display, showing a star system devoid of habitable planets. We'll send out a fake distress signal here, making them think they've found an easy target. But instead of prey, they'll find our entire fleet waiting in the asteroid fields. Zarlith, who had been quietly recording everything, spoke up. But their forces are so much larger than ours. That's where asymmetric warfare comes in, Solana explained, zooming in on specific points in the system. We don't need to match their numbers. We just need to hit them where they're weakest. She demonstrated the strategy, showing how smaller ships could use the asteroid field for cover, striking from unexpected angles and disappearing before the swarm could respond. Grolkoth's eyes widened as understanding dawned. Like the hunting techniques of the shadow stalkers on my homeworld. They're tiny creatures, but they can bring down prey 10 times their size. Exactly, Solana said with a smile. Size isn't everything. Strategy, surprise, and precision are our real weapons. Around them, the engineers had stopped working to watch. Their initial horror at weaponizing their ships had shifted to something new, a growing determination to protect their worlds. One young engineer stepped forward, making an adjustment to the weapon pod designs. If we modify the power distribution like this, we can maintain our ship's maneuverability while carrying the new systems. Solana nodded approvingly. The collective was changing, adapting, not into warriors, but into survivors. This plan, Grolkoth said slowly, it's unlike anything in collective military doctrine, but I believe it will work. He straightened up, making a formal gesture of agreement. You have my full support, Commander. The shipyard's hum faded into the quiet tension of the training facilities. Weapons were one thing, but warriors were another. Ships alone would not save them, only those willing to wield them. And so, beneath the harsh lights of a human military base, the first collective pilots prepared to learn what they had once sworn never to need. Commander Solana stood before the mixed group of human and collective pilots in the training bay. The collective members shifted uneasily, their iridescent skin reflecting the harsh lighting. Today we learn to hide in plain sight, Solana said, pointing to a holographic display of asteroid fields. The swarm expects direct attacks. They won't expect us to use the terrain against them. A collective pilot named Zinra raised her hand. But our ships, they're not built for such maneuvers. That's why we're here, Solana smiled. Watch this. She nodded to a human pilot who launched his simulator pod into a series of tight spins between virtual asteroids. In the adjacent lab, Dr. Clark worked with a team installing the new EMP devices. These disruptors will give us a fighting chance, she explained to a group of wide-eyed collective engineers. When activated, they'll create a bubble of interference that blocks the swarm's ability to communicate. Throughout the week, Solana watched as human and collective pilots grew closer. During meal breaks, they shared stories and jokes. The humans taught combat maneuvers, while the collective showed them their ship's unique features. Zarlith moved among them, recording everything. He approached a young collective pilot named Vertix after a particularly intense training session. How do you feel about learning these fighting techniques? Zarlith asked. Vertix wiped sweat from his brow. It's strange. My whole life we were taught to avoid conflict, but now... He glanced at his human training partner with respect. Now I understand sometimes you must fight to protect what matters. The training continued day and night. Solana drilled them relentlessly on evasion tactics, showing them how to use solar flares and debris fields as cover. Then the message came. High Marshal Grolkoth's hologram appeared in the command center, his expression grave. The decoy signal is working. Our long-range scouts report multiple swarm signatures moving toward the target system, more than we've ever seen before. Solana nodded, her face set with determination. Then it's time. All teams to your stations. This is what we've trained for. Training had ended. The time for theory had passed. As the fleet hovered in silent readiness beyond the gas giant's shadow, even the most reluctant among the collective felt the weight of what was coming. The swarm had taken their world by surprise once. That mistake would not be repeated. The void between planets seemed empty. Behind a massive gas giant's moon, Commander Solana's fleet waited in absolute silence. Their modified ships, equipped with collective stealth tech, blended perfectly with the background radiation. Swarm vessels entering the system, a sensor officer whispered, though there was no need for quiet in space. Through the view screen, dark shapes emerged from faster-than-light travel. The swarm ships looked like massive insects made of metal and flesh, their biomechanical hulls pulsing with eerie light. Hold position, Solana ordered through the encrypted channel. Wait for the flagship cluster. More swarm ships appeared, dozens, then hundreds, far more than their intelligence had suggested. Beside Solana, High Marshal Grolkoth's hands gripped his command chair. There are too many, he muttered. We should abort. Now, Solana's voice cut through the comm channels. All units, execute. From behind moons, asteroids, and gas clouds, the joint fleet burst into action. Human warships led the charge, their weapons already hot. Collective vessels followed in perfect formation, their newly installed weapon pods blazing. The first wave caught the swarm completely off guard. 3 massive command ships erupted in flames before they could react. The human-designed EMP weapons worked perfectly, scrambling the swarm's bio-neural networks. From his observation post on a distant vessel, Zarlith watched in horror and amazement. His recording devices captured everything: the beautiful precision of the ambush, the terrible destruction as ships on both sides were torn apart. But the swarm recovered quickly. Their remaining ships split apart, revealing horrible weapons that looked like living tentacles made of energy. These whips of light cut through several collective ships like paper. "Evasive pattern Delta!" Solana shouted. "Reform on axis!" A massive explosion rocked their flagship. Grolkoth stumbled, his face showing pure fear. "We've lost the entire third wing. We need to—" "All ships converge on coordinates I'm sending now," Solana commanded. Her fingers flew across the tactical display. "Emergency jump on my mark." The swarm pressed their advantage, their superior numbers beginning to tell. More energy tentacles lashed out, shredding through shields and hulls. "Mark." The surviving ships jumped simultaneously, leaving the battlefield in a flash of light. They emerged at the rally point, smoking and damaged but alive. The bridge was silent except for emergency alerts and damage reports. Grolkoth stared at the tactical display, showing their losses in cold numbers. "We hurt them badly," Solana said quietly. "But they're stronger than we thought." This was just the beginning. Through his observation cameras, Zarlith captured the grim faces of both humans and collective crew members. This victory had come at a terrible price, and everyone knew the swarm would be back. The battle was over. The cost counted. The survivors stood among the wreckage, unsure whether to celebrate or mourn. The collective had fought and won, but in doing so, they had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. The medical bay of Station Helios buzzed with frantic activity. Collective doctors, still learning human emergency protocols, worked alongside Earth's combat medics. The air smelled of antiseptic and fear. Zarlith watched a young collective engineer writhe in pain as doctors treated plasma burns across his torso. "I never thought I'd see our people suffer like this," he said quietly. Ambassador Tanaka placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "War always comes with a cost." In the station's main conference chamber, Chairman Valrek's hologram flickered as he addressed the gathered leaders. His usually perfect posture showed signs of strain. "Our casualties are significant," High Marshal Grolkoth reported, his voice heavy. 23 ships lost, hundreds wounded. "And yet we achieved our objective," Commander Solana said firmly. She pulled up a holographic display of the battle data. "Dr. Clark, please share what you found." Dr. Clark stepped forward, her eyes bright with discovery despite her exhaustion. "The swarm's ships don't just communicate. They're linked to a central intelligence, a hive mind, if you will. Look at these neural patterns." The display showed waves of bioelectrical signals flowing between swarm vessels. Zarlith leaned forward, his scientific curiosity piqued. "These patterns, they're not random. They're being directed." "Exactly," Solana said. "We don't need to destroy their whole fleet. We just need to cut off the head." Chairman Valrek's hologram flickered again. "You're suggesting assassination?" "I'm suggesting survival," Solana countered. "One decisive strike could end this war." The room erupted in heated debate. Collective officers argued about the ethics of such a targeted attack, while human military advisors supported Solana's strategy. "Have we not already crossed too many lines?" a collective elder asked. "Our ships now carry weapons. Our people learn to kill. Are we becoming what we once feared?" Ambassador Tanaka stepped into the center of the room. "There's a difference between learning to fight and losing your soul. The real question is, can we defend ourselves without sacrificing who we are?" Silence fell as Chairman Valrek considered her words. Finally, he spoke. "Commander Solana, you have provisional approval to plan this operation. But understand this. We will not sacrifice everything we believe in even to save ourselves." Solana nodded gravely. Sometimes the hardest part of war isn't fighting. It's knowing when to stop. War did not end with a single battle. As the fleet licked its wounds, humanity and the collective prepared for the next inevitable confrontation. The swarm had been weakened, but not destroyed, and the lessons of battle had revealed something far more terrifying than an enemy fleet. War had changed them. Earth's orbital shipyards hummed with activity. Commander Solana stood at the observation deck, watching crews load Dr. Clark's new psychological warfare devices into the fleet's flagship vessels. The signal mimics their own bio-neural patterns, Dr. Clark explained, her hands moving across the holographic display. But it introduces random elements that should create confusion in their hive mind, like static in a radio transmission. Ambassador Tanaka entered the command center, her face showing signs of exhaustion but triumph. The Outer Rim colonies have agreed to join us. Their ships will rendezvous at the rally point. Zarlith sat in a quiet corner of the station's recreation area, interviewing Captain Maria Rodriguez, a veteran of Earth's last major conflict. "People think we enjoy fighting," Rodriguez said, her eyes distant. "But every soldier I know wakes up at night remembering. We do it because we must, not because we want to." The massive combined fleet stretched across space as far as the eye could see. Collective vessels, their elegant lines now bristling with weapon pods, flew in formation with Earth's more angular warships. Chairman Valrek's hologram flickered as he addressed the gathered commanders. "This is the largest fleet ever assembled in collective history," he said, his voice heavy. "I never imagined we would need such force. Yet here we are." High Marshal Grolkoth stood beside Solana on the bridge of the flagship. "Your people have taught us much," he said quietly, "though I pray we never need these lessons again." The fleet's engines began to glow. Thousands of ships, crewed by humans and collective members working side by side, prepared for the jump to FTL. Solana gave the order, her voice clear and steady. "All ships commence jump sequence. May fortune favor the bold." The stars stretched into lines of light as humanity and the collective, united in purpose if not in nature, launched themselves toward their destiny. There was no turning back now. The fleet's engines burned bright as they jumped into the unknown. Zarlith sat among them, heart pounding as he recorded every moment. They were no longer defending. They were going to strike. To end this. One way or another. The fleet burst out of FTL like a shower of meteors. Commander Solana's breath caught in her throat at the sight before them. The swarm's home system was alive, quite literally. Massive organic structures twisted through space, pulsing with sickly green light. "By the ancestors," High Marshal Grolkoth whispered over the comm. "It's breathing." Solana squared her shoulders. "All ships, battle formations. Remember your training." Her voice was steady, masking the fear churning in her gut. The swarm responded instantly. Thousands of bioships peeled away from the structures, their movements unnaturally fluid. The space between the fleets filled with weapons fire, human railguns and missiles alongside collective energy weapons. "Shield wall holding," a collective officer reported as the first wave hit. The combined defensive technology was working, but Solana could see ships falling on both sides. "Infiltration teams. This is our window," Solana commanded, leading her mixed squad of humans and collective volunteers toward the landing pods. The massive central station loomed ahead, a writhing mass of organic technology that housed the swarm's controlling intelligence. From his observation post, Zarlith recorded everything with shaking hands. "The humans move with such purpose," he dictated into his log. "But our people, I see the terror in their eyes as they witness true combat for the first time." Dr. Clark's voice crackled over the comm. "Commander, the psychological warfare devices are active. You have maybe 20 minutes before the swarm adapts." The landing was brutal. 3 pods were destroyed before reaching the station. Solana's pod slammed hard into the organic surface, the impact rattling her teeth. As they emerged, the horror of their situation became clear. The station's interior was a maze of pulsing corridors, and defender drones were everywhere. "Stay together!" Solana shouted as her team engaged the first wave of defenders. She watched a young collective soldier freeze in panic, unable to fire his weapon. A human sergeant pulled him to safety just in time. The casualties mounted quickly. Too quickly. Solana's team fought their way deeper into the station, but every meter cost them dearly. The organic walls themselves seemed to fight back, secreting acid and spawning new defenders from hidden chambers. "Command, this is Strike Team Alpha," Solana reported, her voice tight. "We've secured a foothold, but we've lost 40% of our landing force." From his vantage point, Zarlith watched the battle unfold on multiple screens. His heart ached as he logged another death and another. The humans fought with desperate courage, but it was the collective volunteers who shook him most deeply. Some broke under the strain, while others found reserves of strength they never knew they had. "They are dying," he recorded softly. "Human and collective alike. Not for glory or conquest, but for survival itself. I finally understand why humans never forgot how to fight. Sometimes there is no other choice." The station's corridors pulsed like veins in a living creature. Every step forward brought them deeper into the heart of the swarm's mind. But something was wrong. Solana could feel it. The further they went, the harder it became to hold onto her thoughts, her control. This battle would not be won with weapons alone. Commander Solana led her team through twisting bioorganic corridors that seemed to pulse with each step. The walls oozed a thick fluid that made the air heavy and hard to breathe. "Keep moving," she ordered, her voice tight. "Dr. Clark, how's the signal?" "Getting stronger." Dr. Clark's voice crackled through their comms. "But there's something else. The readings are off the charts." A collective soldier named Venra suddenly slammed his fist into the wall. I can't think straight." His normally calm voice was filled with rage. "Easy, soldier." Solana touched his shoulder but felt her own anger rising for no reason. Her hands shook as she gripped her weapon tighter. "Commander," Zarlith's worried voice came through. "Our observers are noting unusual brain activity in your team. Something in that station is affecting your emotional states." They pushed deeper into the station. 2 human Marines got into a shoving match over a minor disagreement about direction. Solana had to physically separate them, fighting her own urge to lash out. Dr. Clark's voice cut through the haze. "I'm deploying the PSI dampeners now. It should help, but there's only so much we can do." The dampeners helped clear their heads somewhat, but the rage still simmered beneath the surface. They encountered several swarm drones, and the fighting was brutal. Even the collective soldiers, usually so hesitant about violence, tore into their enemies with frightening intensity. After what felt like hours, they reached a massive chamber. In its center, a crystalline structure pulsed with dark energy. Tendrils of biomatter stretched from it in all directions. "That's it," Dr. Clark confirmed, the hive mind's central node. But as they approached, the psychic pressure became overwhelming. One of the human soldiers started laughing uncontrollably, while a collective engineer began weeping. "Commander," Dr. Clark's voice was urgent. "These readings. The psychic field isn't just a defense mechanism. It's how the swarm maintains control. It's channeling and amplifying aggressive impulses." Solana felt it then, a dark whisper in her mind, urging her to give in to rage, to turn on her own people. Looking at her team, she saw the same struggle in their eyes. "The more we fight it," Dr. Clark explained, "the stronger it gets. It's using our own violent impulses against us." The team stood before the pulsing node, each member fighting an internal battle against their darkening thoughts. They'd found their target, but the price of engaging with it might be their very humanity. The shadows of the swarm loomed over them, twisting thoughts, corrupting instincts. Violence surged in their veins, whispering that it was easier to give in. Solana clenched her fists. They had come too far. sacrificed too much to become what they fought against. They had to finish this. The closer they got to the hive mind, the harder it became to think clearly. Commander Solana's hands shook on her weapon as waves of rage washed over her. Around her, both human and collective soldiers twitched and growled, fighting the urge to turn on each other. "Everyone focus," she shouted. "Remember who we are." A horrific screech filled the air. 3 massive swarm guardians burst through the walls, their bodies twisted masses of chitin and metal. One of the human soldiers screamed and opened fire wildly, nearly hitting his teammates. "Control yourself." High Marshal Grolkoth's voice cut through the chaos. The old collective leader stood tall, his usually gentle eyes now blazing with an intensity Solana had never seen. The Guardians attacked. Their razor-sharp limbs slashed through the air as the team scattered. Solana dove behind a pillar, her mind racing with violent thoughts that weren't entirely her own. The ancient texts spoke of this, Grolkoth called out between bursts of covering fire. "The swarm feeds on our darkest impulses." A guardian's tail whipped toward Solana's head. She rolled, but not fast enough. Just as the deadly appendage was about to strike, Grolkoth threw himself into its path. The sickening crunch of impact echoed through the chamber. Grolkoth crumpled to the ground, blood seeping from a massive wound in his chest. "Marshal." Solana crawled to him. "No time," he gasped, gripping her arm. "I understand now. Sometimes violence serves peace." His eyes grew fierce. "I will hold them here. You must reach the core." Before Solana could protest, Grolkoth pushed himself up. With a roar that seemed to shake the very walls, he charged at the Guardians. His movements were savage, primal, everything the collective had tried to eliminate from their nature. "Go!" he bellowed, grappling with one of the monstrous creatures. "Complete the mission." Solana gathered her remaining team and pressed forward, the sound of Grolkoth's last battle fading behind them. Through her comm, she heard Zarlith's shocked whispers as he monitored their progress from the command ship. The weight of what they'd witnessed, what they'd become, pressed down on them all. But they kept moving, carrying the burden of necessary violence toward their final goal. The end was in sight. The hive mind pulsed before them, writhing in response to their presence. The battle behind them had cost them dearly, but the real fight, the one that would decide everything, was still ahead. The massive chamber pulsed with sickly light. Commander Solana and her team stood before a writhing mass of organic machinery that filled the room from floor to ceiling. The swarm's hive mind. Tendrils of biomechanical matter twisted and curled through the air. "Dr. Clark, we're in position," Solana whispered into her comm. Her head throbbed from the psychic assault, but she forced herself to focus. "Activating disruption sequence now." Dr. Clark's voice crackled through. "Stay clear of the emitters." The special devices they'd carried activated with a high-pitched whine. The air filled with a cacophony of sounds and flickering images. A carefully designed chaos, meant to overwhelm the hive mind's neural networks. The mass of tendrils convulsed. A psychic scream tore through their minds, bringing several soldiers to their knees. Solana grit her teeth and pushed forward, pulling explosive charges from her pack. "Keep it distracted," she ordered, running to strategic points around the core. Her hands moved quickly, planting the modified bombs Dr. Clark had designed. The hive mind lashed out. Waves of pure hatred and rage hammered their thoughts. 2 collective soldiers collapsed, blood trickling from their noses. A human sergeant started laughing uncontrollably, raising his weapon at his teammates. "Fight it," Solana commanded, tackling the sergeant. "We are not animals. We choose who we are." The psychic assault intensified. Solana felt an alien presence trying to burrow into her mind, showing her visions of endless violence and bloodshed. But something else rose up in response, not just human stubbornness, but the fierce protective instinct she'd always carried for her people. "Last charge set," she called out. "Everyone out. Move." The team staggered toward the exit as Solana hit the detonator. Multiple explosions ripped through the chamber. The hive mind's screech became deafening. The whole station shuddered as support structures began to fail. All teams immediate evacuation. Dr. Clark's voice cut through the chaos. The station's power core is destabilizing. They ran through buckling corridors as alarms blared. Walls cracked and floors tilted. The station was literally tearing itself apart around them. From his observation post in orbit, Zarlith watched in awe as massive explosions bloomed across the station's surface. His instruments registered the hive mind's psychic signal weakening, fragmenting, and finally beginning to fade. The station collapsed in a blaze of fire and light. The swarm's grip shattered. As the fleet watched from a safe distance, it was Zarlith's voice that spoke first, whispering the words that would echo through history. "We have won." But even as the cheers erupted, an unspoken question lingered. At what cost? The fleet hung back at a safe distance, watching the massive swarm station tear itself apart. Brilliant flashes of light pierced the darkness as secondary explosions rippled through the structure. On the bridge of the command ship, Zarlith pressed his hand against the viewport, his normally steady voice trembling as he recorded. "The station. It's actually falling. We've won." The comm channels erupted with cheers and cries of victory. Across the fleet, humans and collective crews embraced. Commander Solana, her armor still smoking from the escape, allowed herself a small smile as she watched swarm ships drifting aimlessly or turning on each other. "Search and rescue teams deploy immediately," she ordered. "Priority is locating High Marshal Grolkoth." Ambassador Tanaka stepped onto the bridge, her usual poise shaken. "The chairman is requesting to address the fleet." Chairman Valrek's hologram materialized, his expression heavy. "Today marks both triumph and transformation. The threat is contained, but at what cost to our society's soul? We have awakened something in ourselves, the capacity for violence we engineered away generations ago." In the medical bay, Dr. Clark tended to wounded collective soldiers. Many stared blankly ahead, haunted not by their injuries, but by memories of their own actions during the battle. I killed them. So many of them," whispered one young collective officer. The rage felt natural, like it had always been there, waiting. Zarlith moved through the ship recording testimonies. A human marine spoke softly. "We taught them to fight, to kill. That knowledge can't be unlearned. I've seen that look in their eyes before in history videos from Earth's wars." The celebration across the fleet began to quiet as the reality sank in. They had won, but the collective had lost something precious, their certainty in their own nature, their innocence. "We did what was necessary," Commander Solana told the assembled crew. "But necessity leaves scars. We'll help you bear them, as we've borne our own." Chairman Valrek's final words echoed through the ships. "We are changed. What was awakened cannot simply be put back to sleep. We must learn to live with this new truth about ourselves." Victory was not the end, only the beginning of something new. The collective stood before a future reshaped by war. As the treaty was signed and history recorded its final words, Zarlith realized the truth. The battle was won. But peace would be the hardest lesson of all. In the grand assembly hall of the collective's central world, thousands gathered for a ceremony unlike any in their history. The usually pristine white walls now bore battle scars, kept as reminders of what they had faced. Chairman Valrek stood before the assembled crowd, his voice carrying across the silent chamber. "Today we honor High Marshal Grolkoth, who gave his life so that billions might live." He held up a medallion that caught the light. "His sacrifice showed us that even in our darkest moments, we can choose to direct our strength toward protection rather than destruction." Commander Solana watched from her seat, her uniform pressed but her shoulders heavy. When they called her forward as the hero of the joint fleet, she walked with visible reluctance. The medals they pinned to her chest felt like weights. "The victory wasn't mine," she said simply. "It belonged to everyone who learned to face their fears. both of the enemy and of themselves. Ambassador Tanaka took the podium next, her diplomatic poise masking the exhaustion of weeks of negotiations. Today we sign not just a peace treaty, but a partnership. Earth and the collective will jointly oversee a new initiative, the responsible development and containment of defensive technologies. In his private chambers later that day, Zarlith sat at his desk, finishing the last pages of his historical account. His fingers moved across the screen with purpose. In studying humanity, we sought to understand their capacity for war. What we discovered was their capacity for facing hard truths. They do not fear war itself. They have learned to face it directly. Instead, they fear what war awakens in all sentient beings, that primal force that can either protect or destroy. Humans taught us that peace isn't achieved by denying our capacity for violence, but by acknowledging it and choosing how to direct it. They showed us that true strength lies not in the absence of darkness, but in the conscious decision to use our power for protection rather than dominance. As I conclude this account, I see both species changed by our encounter. We are neither purely peaceful nor purely warlike. We are, perhaps for the first time, simply honest about what we can become, for better or worse. And in that honesty lies our best hope for lasting peace. If you enjoyed the story of Jonathan, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.